My daughter mocked me during her wedding, I announced. Then the groom's boss intervened. The parent had been awake since before sunrise, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The house felt too quiet for such an important day. Outside, the sky slowly lightened, and the birds began their morning calls, unaware of the weight pressing on the parent's chest. Today was the wedding day. A day meant for joy, music, and smiling faces. A day the parent had paid for in full, down to the smallest detail, without ever asking for thanks. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Months earlier, when the engagement was announced, the parent had smiled and said all the right things. There had been no hesitation when the daughter mentioned venues, guest lists, or colors. Each time a cost came up, the parent simply nodded and said it would be handled. The daughter seemed relieved, almost distracted, as if this support was expected rather than offered. Still, the parent did not mind. At least, that is what they told themselves. The planning had moved quickly. The venue was elegant, with high ceilings, soft lights, and wide windows that looked out onto a carefully kept garden. The catering menu had been chosen after several tastings, each more expensive than the last. The decor included flowers flown in from another region, candles arranged just so, and linens that felt like silk under the fingers. Every invoice landed on the parent's desk. Every payment was made on time. No complaints. No reminders. Friends who knew the full cost sometimes raised their eyebrows. A few asked why the parent was taking on so much. Others hinted that help could be shared, that the couple could contribute. The parent always brushed it off. This was their child's day, they said. What else was money for if not moments like this? What those friends did not see were the quiet evenings afterward. The parent sitting alone, looking over bank statements, doing careful math, deciding which personal comforts could be delayed or let go. A planned home repair was postponed. A small trip that had been dreamed about for years was quietly cancelled. Even daily habits changed. Fewer meals out. More careful shopping. The parent told no one. Sacrifice felt easier when it stayed invisible. The relationship with the daughter had not always been this distant. There was a time when they talked often, when laughter-filled phone calls and visits stretched long into the night. Over the years, small disagreements had grown into silence. Not loud arguments, just missed calls, short replies, and a growing sense of being unnecessary. The parent had noticed the change but never confronted it directly. They feared pushing too hard would push the daughter further away. When the wedding plans began, the parent hoped it might bring them closer again. Shared decisions, shared excitement, shared memories. At first, there were a few moments like that. Looking at fabric samples together. Talking about the guest list. Remembering relatives who would or would not be invited. But as time passed, the daughter took more control, and the parent's role quietly shifted to that of a silent supporter. There were meetings the parent was not invited to. Changes made without notice. Decisions announced rather than discussed. Each time, the parent swallowed the sting and reminded themselves that weddings were stressful. This was not personal. It was just part of letting go. The night before the wedding, the parent had visited the venue one last time to make sure everything was ready. Staff members moved quickly, adjusting chairs, checking lights, arranging flowers. A coordinator thanked the parent warmly and praised their generosity. The words felt kind but strange, like praise meant for someone else. The parent smiled politely and said nothing more. Back at home, the parent laid out their clothes for the next day. Nothing flashy. Nothing meant to draw attention. Just something neat and respectful. As they folded the fabric, memories surfaced without warning. The daughter as a child, running through the house in oversized shoes. School mornings filled with rushed breakfasts and forgotten homework. Late nights waiting for curfews to be respected. All the small moments that had shaped a life. The parent wondered when things had changed. There was no single moment to point to. Just a slow drift, like two boats once tied together now floating apart. Love was still there. That much was certain. But love, the parent had learned, did not always guarantee closeness. On the morning of the wedding, messages began to arrive. Vendors confirming arrival times. The coordinator asking quick questions. Everything moved like a carefully planned machine. The parent answered each message calmly, efficiently. There was comfort in being useful, even if no one noticed who was doing the work. At the venue, the air buzzed with excitement. Guests arrived dressed in bright colors and warm smiles. Laughter echoed through the halls. The smell of fresh flowers and polished wood filled the space. The parent stood to the side, watching, feeling both proud and strangely invisible. The daughter arrived later, surrounded by friends and helpers. She looked beautiful, radiant even, wrapped in the kind of happiness that seemed to glow. The parent felt a swell of emotion at the sight. For a moment, all the sacrifices felt worth it. This was why they had done it. To see that smile. Their interaction was brief. A quick hug. A few rushed words. The daughter was pulled away almost immediately by someone else who needed her attention. The parent did not mind. Or at least, they told themselves they did not. Today was not about them. As guests took their seats, the parent found their place quietly. Not near the front, not in any position that suggested importance. Just another chair among many. From there, they could see everything. The decorations, the careful lighting, the smooth flow of the event. Every detail reflected months of planning and quiet payments. The ceremony unfolded beautifully. Vows were exchanged. Applause filled the room. Tears were wiped away. The parent watched with a mix of joy and sadness, aware that this moment marked not just a beginning for the couple, but an ending of something else. A chapter closing, whether they were ready for it or not. During the reception, guests praised the setting, the food, the atmosphere. Compliments floated through the room like music. The parent heard them all, each one a small reminder of their unseen effort. They smiled politely when spoken to, deflecting questions about how everything came together. Inside, emotions shifted and tangled. Pride sat beside hurt. Love rested next to loneliness. The parent did not allow any of it to show. They had made a choice long ago to choose peace over confrontation. To support without demanding recognition. To give without keeping score. They believed that if the day went smoothly, if the daughter was happy, then nothing else mattered. Recognition could wait. Conversations could happen another time. Or maybe not at all. The parent was used to carrying things alone. As the evening continued, the parent stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The garden lights glowed softly against the dark sky. Laughter drifted through the open doors behind them. The parent took a deep breath, letting the cool air settle their thoughts. This wedding, they realized, was more than a celebration. It was a test of how much they were willing to give without being seen. A final act of love offered freely, without conditions. Whether it would be noticed or not was no longer the point. The parents straightened their shoulders and returned inside. There were smiles to return, conversations to navigate, and a role to play until the night was over. Whatever tomorrow might bring, today would remain focused on happiness. Not recognition. Not validation. Just love, given quietly, and the hope that someday, somehow, it would be understood. The wedding day moved forward like a long, carefully timed performance. Music played softly as guests settled into their seats. Servers moved with practiced smiles. Everything looked perfect on the surface. But beneath that smooth flow, small moments began to form, moments that felt uneven, like tiny stones hidden under a carpet. The parent noticed the first one early in the day. It was nothing dramatic. Just a look, quick and impatient, when a simple question was asked. The daughter's voice carried a sharp edge when she replied, short and clipped, as if the words themselves were a burden. The parent nodded and stepped back, telling themselves it was just stress. Big days made people tense. It meant nothing. As the hours passed, these moments repeated. Instructions were given without eye contact. Requests were brushed aside. When the parent tried to offer help, the daughter waved it off with a sigh, as if the effort was unnecessary. Each time, the parent felt a small sting, quickly buried under understanding. Today was not the day for feelings. The seating arrangement revealed itself next. Guests were guided toward their places, laughter filling the air as people searched for their names. The parent followed quietly, scanning the table cards until they found their own. It was placed near the back of the room, far from the center, far from the main table where close family and important guests sat. For a moment, the parent stood still, holding the small card between their fingers. It felt heavier than it should have. They looked around, noticing how others reacted to their seats. Some smiled in approval. Others laughed and traded places. No one noticed the parent pause. A few guests glanced over, their expressions shifting briefly. Confusion flickered across their faces. Some clearly expected the parent to be seated closer, given their role in the day. But no one said anything. Conversations continued. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Life moved on. The parent took their seat without comment. The chair felt no different from any other, but the distance carried meaning. They reminded themselves again that seating was complicated. Mistakes happened. It was not worth making a scene. At the table, polite conversation filled the gaps. Guests talked about the weather, the decorations, the food. Compliments were exchanged freely. Someone mentioned how beautiful everything looked and wondered aloud how much effort must have gone into planning it all. The parent smiled gently and said very little. As the reception continued, jokes began to surface. Light-hearted on the outside, but edged with something uncomfortable. A comment about how the daughter had done everything herself. A remark about independence, said with a laugh that lingered just a bit too long. Each joke landed softly on the room, then drifted away, leaving behind a faint sense of unease. The parent felt those words more than they showed. Each one chipped quietly at something inside. Still, they laughed politely when expected. They clapped when others clapped. They stayed in rhythm with the room. During one moment, a guest approached the parent with a smile that did not quite reach their eyes. They made a casual remark about how relaxed the parent seemed, how easygoing they must be to let things unfold without fuss. The parent nodded, unsure how to respond. Endurance often looked like agreement from the outside. The daughter passed by several times, always busy, always moving. When their eyes met, the parent offered a warm smile. Sometimes it was returned quickly. Other times, it was missed entirely. The parent did not call out. They did not ask for attention. They stayed where they were, steady and quiet. As speeches began, the room grew louder with anticipation. Glasses clinked. Chairs turned. People leaned forward, ready for humor and sentiment. The parent listened carefully, hoping for words that might acknowledge family, sacrifice, or shared history. Some speeches were heartfelt. Others leaned into humor. One included a joke that made the room laugh, but left the parent sitting stiffly. It was said lightly, almost playfully, but it brushed too close to something personal. A few guests glanced toward the parent again, uncertain. Still, no one spoke. The parent kept their expression neutral. They had learned long ago that reacting often gave moments more power than they deserved. Silence, though heavy, felt safer. Between speeches, servers brought food. Plates were placed carefully. The parent ate slowly, tasting very little. Their focus drifted between the room and their own thoughts. They wondered if anyone else felt the tension building, or if it lived only inside them. At another table nearby, laughter rose suddenly, sharp and loud. A comment had been made about family dynamics, something vague enough to be dismissed, specific enough to sting. The parent did not look up right away. When they did, they noticed a few guests watching them closely, curiosity mixed with discomfort. The parent met none of those looks directly. They stared instead at the table setting, at the careful arrangement of cutlery and folded napkins. These small details felt easier to face than people's expressions. Inside, A quiet battle played out. A part of them wanted to speak, to correct assumptions, to ask why things felt this way. Another part, stronger and more practiced, urged patience. This day would pass. Words spoken now could never be taken back. They reminded themselves of their purpose. This was not about pride. It was about peace. About getting through the day without adding another layer of discomfort. Embarrassment would linger longer than silence. As the evening wore on, the pattern became clearer. Disrespect did not arrive loudly. It came in glances, tones, and placement. In what was said and what was left unsaid. The parent recognized it not as a single moment, but as a collection of small ones, stacking quietly on top of each other. Some guests whispered among themselves. The parent caught fragments of conversation drifting through the air. Questions without answers. Observations left unfinished. People noticed, even if they pretended not to. One guest leaned closer and asked softly if the parent was enjoying the night. The question held more concern than politeness. The parent smiled and said yes. It was easier than explaining. Music grew louder as the night progressed. The dance floor filled. Laughter rose again, masking tension with sound. The parent watched from their seat, hands folded neatly in their lap. They clapped along, even when their heart felt tired. At one point, the daughter approached the table briefly, asking if everything was fine. The words sounded automatic, rehearsed. The parent nodded and said it was perfect. The daughter smiled, relieved, and moved on without waiting for more. That moment stayed with the parent. The space between the question and the answer felt wider than the room itself. Later, as the lights dimmed slightly and conversation softened, the parent allowed themselves a slow breath. They had made it this far. The sharp moments had not broken them. Calm had been maintained. They knew others had noticed. They could feel it in the careful way some people spoke to them, in the glances that lingered a second too long. Silence, however, remained the rule of the night. The parent understood something important then. Endurance was not the absence of pain. It was the choice to carry it quietly when speaking would cause more harm than healing. As the celebration continued around them, the parent stayed grounded in that belief. They would not let small cuts turn into open wounds. Not today. Today belonged to endurance, even if it came at a cost. The room settled into a softer hum as the speeches began. Plates were cleared, glasses refilled, and chairs angled toward the center. There was an expectant energy in the air, the kind that came before laughter and applause. People leaned forward, ready for stories, jokes, and memories meant to warm the heart. The parent sat quietly, hands resting together, eyes fixed toward the front. Speeches were often emotional. They could bring surprises. Still, the parent expected nothing more than the usual words of gratitude and light humor. They told themselves there was no reason to feel uneasy. The daughter stood when it was her turn. She looked confident, relaxed, comfortable in the spotlight. Her voice carried easily through the room as she thanked friends, guests, and everyone who had helped make the day special. Applause followed each pause. The parent clapped along, feeling that familiar mix of pride and distance. Then the tone shifted. The daughter laughed lightly and made a comment about growing up under too much guidance. She joked about rules, opinions, and what she called constant advice. The words were framed as playful, but there was an edge beneath them. Some people laughed right away. Others hesitated, unsure. The parent felt the first real sting then. Not sharp but deep. They kept their face calm, eyes steady. This was still just humor, they told themselves. People joked about parents all the time. The daughter continued. She spoke about becoming independent, about finally doing things her own way. She described the wedding as proof of stepping out from old ways, old thinking. The words outdated and controlling slipped into the speech, wrapped in laughter and smiles. The room responded unevenly. A few guests laughed louder than before. Others shifted in their seats. A quiet ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. The parent heard the laughter as if it were coming from far away. They did not look around. They did not look down. They stayed still, breathing slowly, holding their expression steady. Inside, something tightened. The daughter glanced briefly toward the back of the room while speaking. The look lasted only a moment, but it landed heavily. The parent met it without changing expression. Silence felt safer than reaction. Another joke followed. This one about how the wedding was better because certain voices were no longer involved. It drew more laughter, thinner this time. A few guests glanced toward the parent again, their smiles fading quickly. The parent's ears rang slightly, as if the room had grown too loud and too quiet at the same time. Each word landed carefully, deliberately, as if chosen to entertain others at someone else's expense. They felt heat rise briefly, then fade. Embarrassment pressed in, heavy and slow. The parent focused on the table in front of them. The pattern in the cloth. The reflection of light in the glassware. Anything to keep their face calm. The speech moved on. The daughter spoke of love, partnership, and the future. Applause followed, louder now, as people seemed relieved the tension had passed. The daughter smiled and returned to her seat, clearly pleased. The parent clapped with the rest of the room. Their hands moved automatically. The sound felt distant, hollow. Whispers stirred almost immediately. Not loud enough to be obvious, but present. A few heads turned. Some guests exchanged looks, subtle and uncertain. One woman at a nearby table leaned closer to her companion, whispering something that made them both glance toward the back again. No one said anything directly. No one stood up. The moment passed the way uncomfortable moments often did, smoothed over by politeness and noise. The parent remained still. Silence wrapped around them like armor. They had learned long ago that reacting publicly only shifted attention, never fixed wounds. Speaking now would not undo what had been said. It would only change the shape of the room. Another speaker rose soon after, lightening the mood with safer jokes and kind words. Laughter returned more easily. The room relaxed. Yet the earlier words lingered, settling quietly into the space between people. The parent noticed how some guests avoided eye contact now. Others offered sympathetic smiles that vanished quickly. A man passing by the table paused for half a second, as if considering saying something, then thought better of it and kept walking. The parent accepted it all without comment. Endurance had become instinct. Inside, memories surfaced without permission. Late nights spent worrying. Early mornings spent working. Choices made quietly to protect and provide. None of it had been perfect. Mistakes had been made, as they always were in raising a child. But hearing those years reduced to jokes hurt in a way that felt public and permanent. The parent wondered if the daughter understood what she was doing, or if the applause had drowned out any sense of consequence. Humor, once released into a crowd, often took on a life of its own. A server came by to refill glasses. The parent thanked them softly. Their voice sounded steady, even to themselves. That small success felt important. As conversations resumed around the room, bits of the speech echoed back in fragments. Someone repeated a line with a laugh. Another shook their head and changed the subject. The words traveled, reshaped by each retelling. The parent stayed quiet. Silence was no longer just protection. It was dignity. At one point, a guest approached the table and leaned in slightly. They said something vague about speeches being tricky, about jokes not always landing the way people expect. The parent smiled and nodded. There was nothing to add. The daughter laughed loudly across the room, surrounded by friends. She looked free, light, unburdened. The parent watched her for a moment, then looked away. Music rose again, filling the space with sound. The crowd shifted toward celebration once more. Glasses clinked. Chairs scraped. The night moved forward, indifferent to what had been lost in words. The parent remained seated for a long while, letting the noise pass over them. They felt tired, not in the body, but deeper. The kind of tired that came from holding things in. Still, they did not regret their silence. They believed strongly that reacting would have changed nothing for the better. Calm, though costly, preserved something important. As the evening stretched on, the sting dulled slightly. It did not disappear, but it softened enough to be carried. The parent reminded themselves again why they were there. Why they had given so much. Why they had chosen peace, even when it was not returned. Public words could wound deeply, but they did not define the truth of a lifetime. The parent held on to that thought, repeating it quietly until it felt solid. The celebration continued, bright and loud around them. And the parents stayed where they were, silent, composed, letting that silence stand as both shield and statement. The laughter that followed the speeches did not last the way it was meant to. It faded faster than before, thinning out until it felt forced. The room tried to return to celebration, but something had changed. The air no longer felt light. It felt careful. People adjusted in their seats. Conversations restarted, but at a lower volume. The energy that once moved freely now stumbled, as if unsure where it was allowed to go. Music continued to play, but it no longer covered everything. The parent noticed it immediately. Not because anyone said anything, but because silence began to appear in strange places. Small pauses between laughs. Awkward gaps in conversations. The kind of quiet that follows when a line has been crossed, even if no one names it. Some guests avoided looking toward the back of the room. Their eyes slid away quickly, choosing plates, phones, or the dance floor instead. Others glanced over briefly, then looked away just as fast, guilt flickering across their faces. They had laughed a moment ago. Now they seemed unsure what that laughter meant. At nearby tables, whispers rose and fell. Short sentences. Unfinished thoughts. No one spoke clearly enough to be overheard, but the tone was unmistakable. Something felt wrong, and everyone knew it. The parent remained still, hands folded, posture steady. They did not shrink or stiffen. If anything, their calm seemed sharper now, more noticeable against the room's discomfort. Silence had settled around them like a quiet border. A woman passing by slowed her steps, clearly debating whether to stop. She smiled weakly at the parent, then continued walking without a word. The moment hung there briefly, then vanished. Across the room, the groom stood near a group of friends. His smile came and went too quickly. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, eyes moving between conversations that no longer flowed as easily. His gaze drifted toward the back, lingering for a second longer than before. He looked uncertain. Caught between roles. Between the joy of the day and the discomfort he could no longer ignore. He leaned toward someone beside him and said something quietly. The response was a shrug. The groom glanced toward the parent again, this time with something closer to concern. His brow tightened slightly, as if he were trying to decide whether to step in, to say something, to fix what had already happened. But the moment passed. The music swelled, and he was pulled back into conversation. The parent noticed all of it. The hesitation. The glances. The unspoken questions. Years of experience had trained them to read rooms like this, to sense when words had landed too hard. Still, they did nothing. They refused to let embarrassment take control. They refused to trade dignity for defense. Sitting quietly felt like the only choice that kept their sense of self intact. A server came by and asked softly if everything was all right. The parent smiled and nodded. The question lingered longer than it needed to, filled with meaning that went beyond service. At another table, a guest laughed too loudly at a joke that was not funny. The sound cut through the room, then stopped abruptly. No one joined in. The parent looked around slowly, taking in the space. The decorations still glowed. The candles still flickered. The flowers still smelled sweet. On the surface, nothing had changed. Yet the room felt different now, like a place that had witnessed something it could not forget. They thought about the years that led to this moment. The early mornings. The late nights. The quiet sacrifices made without announcements. The times they had chosen patience over pride, support over control. None of it had been perfect, but it had been real. Now, those years had been reshaped into something smaller. A joke. A tone. A suggestion that they had been unnecessary. The parent let the thought pass through them without clinging to it. Holding on to anger would only deepen the hurt. Nearby, a group of relatives spoke in hushed voices. One shook their head slowly. Another crossed their arms and stared at the floor. Their discomfort was visible, but restrained. No one challenged what had been said. No one corrected the story. The silence around the moment grew heavier, filled with things people wished had gone differently. The parent understood something then. Even when no one speaks, truth still leaves an impression. The room had felt it. Everyone had. The groom passed by again, closer this time. He slowed, opened his mouth slightly, then closed it. His eyes met the parent's briefly. There was apology there, mixed with uncertainty. He nodded once and moved on. That small gesture mattered more than words would have. The parent straightened just a little, not out of pride, but out of resolve. They would not let this moment undo who they were. Years of sacrifice could not truly be erased by a speech, no matter how public. As dancing picked up again, some guests made a point of including the parent in small ways. A greeting. A gentle question. A quiet smile. Nothing dramatic, but sincere. The parent accepted each one calmly. No bitterness. No explanation. Just presence. The celebration continued, but it carried a different weight now. People were more careful with their words. Jokes softened. Laughter became selective. The parents stayed where they were, grounded and composed. Dignity did not require defense. It showed itself through restraint. Even as the night moved forward, the shift remained. The room would remember this moment, whether anyone admitted it or not. And the parent, still silent, still steady, allowed that quiet to speak on their behalf. For a brief moment, it seemed like the evening might settle back into its rhythm. Music rose again. People shifted closer to the dance floor. Conversations restarted, cautious but moving forward. The sharp edge left by the speeches dulled just enough for the room to breathe. Then a chair scraped softly against the floor. It was not loud, but it cut through the noise in a way that felt deliberate. A man stood near one of the front tables. He was well dressed, confident without being flashy. Many guests recognized him, though few knew him personally. He was the groom's boss. At first, no one paid much attention. People stood up all the time at receptions. To stretch, to greet someone, to leave the room. But this time was different. He did not move away from the table. Instead, he looked toward the stage. He raised one hand slightly. The gesture was calm, unhurried. He asked for the microphone. The request was so unexpected that the music continued for a few seconds before anyone reacted. Then the sound faded. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The room grew quiet in layers, like waves pulling back from shore. The coordinator hesitated, clearly unsure if this was planned. The man nodded once, politely, with the ease of someone used to being heard. After a short pause, the microphone was handed over. A low murmur moved through the guests. Some leaned forward. Others exchanged curious looks. This was not on the program. No one had mentioned another speech. At the back of the room, the parent looked up. They had been watching the dance floor, half lost in thought, when the sudden silence drew their attention. Their eyes followed the direction of everyone else's gaze until they saw the man standing near the front. Surprise flickered across their face, brief but genuine. They straightened slightly in their chair, unsure what this moment was becoming. Still, their expression remained composed. Experience had taught them not to expect much. Across the room, the groom froze where he stood. His smile faded into something uncertain. He looked toward his boss, then toward the crowd, then back again. His hands came together in front of him, fingers interlacing tightly. The daughter glanced up as well, confusion crossing her face. She whispered something to the person beside her, then fell silent as the microphone came to life. The man cleared his throat once. The sound echoed softly. "I hadn't planned to speak tonight," he said, his voice steady and clear. "But sometimes, moments call for honesty." The room stayed silent. No laughter followed. No polite clapping. Just attention. He paused, scanning the room slowly, as if measuring his words before releasing them. When he spoke again, it was with calm certainty. "I've worked with the groom for many years," he continued. "I've seen him grow, struggle, and succeed. He's earned my respect." The groom shifted, clearly unsure where this was going. "But success," the man said, "rarely happens in isolation." A few guests nodded unconsciously. The man took a small step forward. "I've learned that the strongest people I know didn't get there alone. They were supported, guided, sometimes quietly." At the back of the room, the parent felt a subtle tightening in their chest. Not pain this time. Anticipation. The man's gaze moved deliberately, not stopping on the couple, but traveling instead toward the back. Toward the parents' table. "I want to acknowledge something that hasn't been said tonight," he said. "And someone." The silence deepened. Even the servers had stopped moving. The parent felt dozens of eyes begin to shift in their direction. They did not move. They did not look away. Their hands remained folded, steady. "This wedding," the man continued, "didn't come together by accident. It took effort, sacrifice, and support that most people never see." A few guests inhaled sharply. The groom looked back now, following his boss's line of sight. His face changed as understanding began to dawn. "I've been taught," the man said, "that leadership isn't about being loud. It's about standing firm, even when you're overlooked." The parent felt heat rise again, but this time it was different. Not embarrassment. Something closer to recognition. The man paused once more. He did not rush. He allowed the weight of the moment to settle. "There's someone here tonight," he said, "who chose to support without asking for credit, who gave without demanding acknowledgement, and who showed strength by remaining dignified when it would have been easier to react." The room felt frozen. The parents' breath slowed. Their heart beat steadily, heavy but controlled. They did not yet understand what was coming, only that something important had shifted. Nearby, guests turned fully in their chairs now. Whispers stopped. Faces softened. The man nodded slightly, as if confirming his own decision. That kind of strength deserves respect. The groom swallowed hard. His shoulders dropped, tension visible. The daughter stood very still. At the back, the parent remained seated, surprised but reserved, unaware of how far this moment was about to go. They had spent the entire evening bracing themselves to endure quietly. They had not prepared for this. The man adjusted the microphone in his hand, ready to continue. And the room, completely silent now, waited. The man held the microphone loosely, as if there were no urgency behind his words. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean into drama. What he carried instead was calm certainty, the kind that did not need force to be heard. "I want to be clear," he said, looking around the room. "This isn't about blame. And it isn't about embarrassment." His tone was steady, respectful. The kind people listened to without realizing why. He took a breath and continued. "I've known the groom for many years. Not just as an employee, but as a person. I've seen him on difficult days, not just successful ones." The groom stood quietly now, eyes fixed on the floor. "What always stood out to me," the man said, "was his sense of responsibility, his steadiness, his ability to stay grounded even when things were uncertain." A few heads nodded. The room leaned in. That kind of stability doesn't appear by chance, he went on. It's learned. It's shaped over time. His gaze moved again toward the back of the room, but he did not point. He did not single anyone out with a gesture. He let the meaning settle on its own. I know where that foundation came from, he said simply. The silence deepened, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It felt focused. I've met the parent many times, he continued. Not in loud moments. In quiet ones. In conversations that didn't need an audience. The parent felt a subtle tightening in their chest, their expression unchanged. I've watched how they show up, the man said. Consistently. Without asking for recognition. Without needing credit. He paused briefly, allowing the words to land. When the groom faced challenges early in his career, he said, he had support that allowed him to keep going. Not pressure. Not control. Support. Several guests shifted now, their faces thoughtful. That support came with values, the man added. Respect. Discipline. Accountability. The understanding that doing the right thing matters, even when no one is watching. The groom swallowed hard. I don't speak about these things lightly, the man said. I speak from what I have personally seen. He adjusted his grip on the microphone slightly, still composed. I've witnessed generosity given quietly. Sacrifices made without announcement. Decisions that put someone else's future ahead of personal comfort. A murmur moved through the room, soft and restrained. This celebration tonight, he said, is part of that same pattern. He did not mention numbers. He did not use dramatic language. He did not accuse. He stated facts the way one might describe the weather. I believe it's important to acknowledge truth when it's present, he continued. Especially when it's easy to overlook. The room felt still, attentive. There are people who lead loudly, he said. And there are people who lead by example. His eyes lifted briefly, meeting the parents for the first time. I've learned to respect the second kind more. The parent held the gaze calmly, heart steady, eyes clear. This isn't about rewriting stories, the man said. It's about recognizing what already exists. The groom's shoulders dropped slightly, as if a weight had been named at last. I wouldn't be standing here tonight, the man said, if I hadn't seen firsthand the character that shaped the person I work with every day. He nodded once, subtle and sincere. That character, he said, deserves respect. The words settled gently into the room. No one moved. No one interrupted. The parent felt something shift inside them. Not triumph. Not relief. Just a quiet sense of being seen. The man lowered the microphone slightly, his role finished. I wish the couple happiness, he concluded. And I hope moments like this remind us how important quiet strength truly is. He handed the microphone back without ceremony and returned to his seat. The room remained silent for a few seconds longer. Then someone began to clap. Slowly, others followed. The applause that followed did not rush in all at once. It began slowly, carefully, as if the room needed a moment to understand what it was responding to. Hands came together one table at a time. The sound grew, but it never turned loud or celebratory. It stayed measured, thoughtful. People were not clapping out of excitement. They were acknowledging something real. The parent remained seated, hands resting calmly in their lap. They did not nod. They did not smile. Their expression stayed steady, grounded, untouched by the noise around them. What mattered had already been said. Nothing more was needed. Across the room, faces looked different now. The earlier discomfort had settled into clarity. Guests were no longer unsure about what they had felt. The pieces had come together, quietly but firmly. Some people lowered their hands before others, applause fading unevenly. A few glanced toward the parent again, this time without confusion or pity. What showed instead was respect. The groom stood still, breathing slowly. His jaw tightened once, then relaxed. He did not clap right away. When he did, it was brief and restrained. His eyes stayed forward, but his posture had changed. Something inside him had shifted, too. Then there was the daughter. At first, she had held her posture, chin lifted, expression unreadable. But as the words settled and the response followed, the confidence she had worn all evening began to thin. Her smile faded, replaced by something tighter, more uncertain. She looked around, as if searching the room for confirmation that what had just happened was real. The attention was no longer on her. It had moved elsewhere. Her eyes drifted toward the back. She saw the parent sitting exactly as before. Calm. Still. Not triumphant. Not wounded. Just present. For the first time that evening, the daughter did not look away quickly. She held the gaze for a moment too long. The realization arrived without words. Not as shame, but as awareness. The kind that comes when a line has been crossed and there is no easy way back. She swallowed, her throat moving visibly. Her hands tightened at her sides. Around her, friends shifted, suddenly unsure how to act. A few stopped smiling altogether. The daughter's earlier words echoed back to her now, stripped of laughter. She seemed to hear them the way others had heard them. Public. Permanent. She glanced toward the groom, hoping for something. Support. Direction. Rescue. He did not meet her eyes. Instead, he looked down briefly, then straightened. He did not speak. Silence did enough. The room had changed its posture. Conversations did not restart right away. Music did not return immediately. People sat with what they had heard, letting it settle. A few guests offered small nods in the parents' direction as they passed. Others said nothing, but their expressions spoke clearly. No one rushed to fill the space with jokes now. The parent noticed all of it without reacting. They had not wanted validation. They had not hoped for apology or recognition. What mattered most to them was truth. And truth, once spoken, did not require defense. Inside, emotions moved quietly. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something gentler. A sense that the weight they had carried alone all evening was no longer invisible. But they did not rise. They did not gesture. They did not claim the moment. They allowed it to pass. That choice, more than anything else, defined them. At one nearby table, a guest leaned in to whisper something to another. The second guest nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. Across the room, an older relative pressed their lips together and exhaled, as if something unresolved had finally found its shape. The daughter shifted again, adjusting her posture, trying to reclaim control of the moment. But the room no longer moved with her. It had settled somewhere else. She attempted a small smile toward her friends. It did not hold. The parent watched without judgment. They understood how hard it was to sit with consequences when no one rushed to soften them. The applause faded completely. Silence returned. This time, it was not awkward. It was full. The coordinator hesitated, unsure whether to restart the music. The groom gave a small nod. The sound returned softly, almost cautiously. Guests stood, conversations resuming in quieter tones. Nothing dramatic followed. No confrontation. No raised voices. And yet, everything had changed. The daughter avoided looking back again. She busied herself with greetings, with movement, with anything that kept her from standing still too long. The confidence she had worn earlier did not return. The groom eventually made his way toward the back of the room. He stopped a few steps away from the parent, unsure whether to speak. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The parent looked up at him calmly. He nodded once, deeply. There was gratitude there. And something like regret. The parent returned the nod, just as quietly. No words passed between them. They were not needed. As the evening moved forward, guests treated the parent differently. Not with praise or attention, but with care. Conversations slowed when they approached. Jokes softened. Respect adjusted itself naturally, without instruction. The parent accepted it all without comment. They had spent years giving without expectation. They would not begin demanding now. The daughter watched these interactions from a distance. Each one landed softly, but firmly. She understood now that some impressions could not be undone with charm or explanation. Her earlier laughter echoed back to her again, thinner each time. The parent remained exactly who they had been all evening. Calm. Grounded. Unmoved by praise or discomfort. Truth had spoken. And they had not needed to raise their voice to be heard. As the night slowly drew to a close, the celebration softened into something quieter. The music lowered. Conversations became smaller, more personal. Laughter still appeared, but it no longer filled the room the way it had earlier. The wedding continued, yet it carried a different weight now, one shaped by truth rather than performance. The parent remained where they had been for most of the evening. Not hidden, not elevated, simply present. They watched people move past them, watched expressions change, watched understanding take root without being announced. They felt no urge to explain themselves. For many years, they had believed that respect came from endurance, from giving more, from staying silent when it would have been easier to speak. Tonight did not erase those beliefs, but it reshaped them. Respect, they realized, could not be forced or requested. It could not be bought with sacrifice alone. But truth had its own gravity. It surfaced when it was ready, often carried by unexpected voices. Across the room, the daughter moved carefully now. She smiled when required, nodded when spoken to, laughed when laughter was expected. But the ease she once carried was gone. Her movements were measured. Her words shorter. She avoided the back of the room. Not out of anger. Out of awareness. She understood now that what had been said could not be taken back. Public words lived on their own. They settled into memory, into stories retold later in quieter settings. She had intended humor. What she had created was distance. The lesson did not arrive loudly. It arrived slowly, in glances that no longer held admiration, in conversations that shifted when she joined them, in the way laughter no longer followed her lead automatically. She felt it, even if she did not name it. The groom stayed close to her side as the night went on, not out of obligation, but out of quiet concern. He spoke less than before. When he did speak, his tone was softer, thoughtful. Once, he looked toward the back of the room again. The parent noticed. Nothing passed between them then. No gestures. No words. Just shared understanding. The boss did not linger. After his words had settled and the applause faded, he returned to his seat briefly, exchanged a few quiet remarks with those beside him, and then stood once more. This time, there was no attention drawn to it. No scraping chairs. No silence. He slipped out the way he had entered the moment earlier, without ceremony. He had said enough. The parent noticed his departure only because they had learned to notice quiet things. They felt no need to stop him. Gratitude did not require display. The truth had already been spoken. That was gift enough. As guests began to say their goodbyes, several approached the parent in small, respectful ways. A gentle touch on the arm. A quiet word. A nod held a second longer than politeness required. None of them mentioned the speech directly. They did not need to. The parent responded with the same calm they had carried all evening. Thanking people. Wishing them safe travels. Offering warm smiles without expectation. Inside, reflection settled in. They thought about the choices they had made over the years. The times they had stayed quiet to keep peace. The moments they had stepped back so others could step forward. None of those choices felt wasted. But they understood now that silence, while powerful, did not always tell the whole story. Sometimes, truth needed a voice. And sometimes, that voice did not belong to the one who carried the burden. The daughter watched these interactions from a distance, her expression thoughtful, guarded. She did not interrupt. She did not approach. The space between her and the parent felt heavier now, filled with things that could not be resolved in a single night. She would carry this moment with her. Not as punishment, but as memory. As consequence. Public mockery, she learned, left marks that were not erased by time alone. Words spoken for laughter could reshape how people saw you, and how you saw yourself. The parent gathered their things slowly when it was time to leave. No rush. No need to escape. They took one last look at the room. At the lights. At the tables. At the place where so much had been given, quietly. They felt tired, but steady. Outside, the night air was cool and still. The noise of the celebration dimmed behind them. For a moment, they stood alone, breathing deeply. They did not feel victorious. They felt whole. This evening had tested something important. Not their patience, but their sense of self. And it had held. They understood now that dignity did not shout. It did not argue. It waited. It endured. And when truth finally rose, dignity stood ready to receive it without needing to prove anything. As they walked away, the final lessons settled clearly in their mind. Respect cannot be demanded, but truth has a way of surfacing. And sometimes, dignity speaks loudest when someone else finally tells the truth.